going to try to focus on all the text, but I'm very excited about some of the stuff I have for you tonight. We are in Genesis chapter 8. And thus far we've been going over the story of Noah and the great flood, and we've looked at how the flood was brought about by God dealing with just the depravity that had built up in the world. Mankind's heart is sinful. We have a sinful nature. And what we've seen thus far in the world between creation to the time of Noah is that mankind had reached a level of just violence and moral just depravity in that sense. We've seen that even in the text itself that someone had killed someone because they injured them. And his justification is that if someone can be judged, then his mindset had become that he would be the judge. He can make the decision of what is right and wrong. And with all these things going on, God had came to Noah and said, I'm going to judge the world. I'm going to destroy everything. You have found favor. Because of his faith, he was seen as righteous, and therefore he said, I'm going to save you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. And a collection of all the creatures on the planet. Build an ark, for I'm going to make it rain, and there's going to be a flood. And we've talked about how in the pre-flood world, both flooding and raining were unheard of to them. And so it was a step of faith to even believe such a thing would occur. Did that thing just flicker, or am I just... Okay. Guess we'll figure it out later. Just make sure I'm not going crazy. Any more crazy. So Noah is faithful in creating the ark. God brings the animals to him and says, board the ark, and the rain came. The flood waters came, the entire world is destroyed. And with that, I kind of want to I'll hold off until I get in the text. I'm trying to get ahead of myself here. But here we are, he's been on the ark, and he's been on the ark for a very long time at this point. But now we're going to see the flood waters subside. Starting in verse 1 here. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark. God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. First thing I just kind of want to point out here is God didn't forget about Noah. In our current vernacular, we think of the word remembered as, oh yeah, God didn't put Noah, his family, and all these animals on the ark, bring about the flood waters, and then about 40 days later, he's like, there's something I'm forgetting. When we see this term, especially when we're talking in context of God remembering, what he's saying is he didn't forget them. He didn't let it go and just come back to it later. He remembered what he had promised Noah. He remembered what is going on. And he basically, when it says God remembered, he's bringing his attention back. He remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle and that were with them in the ark, and God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. Also the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky was restrained. And the water receded steadily from the earth, and at the end of 150 days, the water decreased. So, this is one of the things that's usually challenged in this story, is wind can't get rid of that much water. But as I brought up last week, Psalm 104 actually tells us that the winds, yes, were brought about But God, He can do all things. And in the psalm, it says that God drew the line. He decided where the waters would go. He brought them back. They came off of the mountains and into the valleys. And looking at it, and I know I've brought up a lot of different like scientific, creation scientist stuff in this, but that's a lot of water. That is a lot of pressure. And when we talk about the springs and the fountains that were pre-flood, that water had to be somewhere in those springs. Now you bring about waters that topple any mountain that we know of. That's a whole lot of pressure. We can't even reach the deepest points of our current oceans because we don't know how to make something that can withstand that pressure. So we're talking pressure great enough that it could collapse these underground caverns. It could quite literally break the tectonic plates of the earth if need be. So the waters didn't just subside because some wind blew, but the wind is brought about and all this water is moved to where it needs to go. The waters subsided. 150 days, the water decreased. In the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. The water decreased steadily until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains were visible. So we're seeing here, the flood stopped, but it didn't mean they got off the boat right away. Like we mentioned last week, Noah and his family and all these animals were in this ark for a year. And if anybody's had a family reunion, kind of gets a little stressful when you're all crammed together. Now let's add animals, basically a barn, a very large barn, and all the waste of these animals. It was a miserable time. Bless Noah for not throwing some of the animals overboard, I guess. I wasn't going to say it, but I'll let Patty say it. But the tops of the mountains became visible. Then it came about at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark, which he had made, and he sent out a raven. And it flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. Then he sent a dove from him to see if the water had abated from the face of the land. The dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, so she returned to him into the ark, for the water was on the surface of all the earth. Then he put out his hand, took her, and brought her into the ark himself. What is Noah doing here? The idea that here, and it was practiced for quite a while in any kind of nautical situation on boats and stuff, especially in the early days when mankind was still jumping on a ship to go explore. Occasionally you would get lost. And the idea here is if you let a bird loose and it doesn't return, you're close to land. If it circles around for a while, comes back, you're out in the middle of nowhere. And it's kind of the same idea here, is he's releasing these birds to see if there's sign of any kind of dry land. Because as he said, one window. So this was a practice not so much done anymore in modern times, because everybody's got a GPS on them, I guess. But this was the practice here. They would send out these birds to see if there's dry land nearby. And as we've seen so far, he's let out a raven and he's let out a dove, and no dice. So he waited yet another 7 days, another week, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. The dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was abated from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent out a dove, but she did not return to him again. So waited a week, sent out a dove, and it came back, as it states here, Behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. What we were seeing in the beginning of the flood is God was not messing around. He was talking about total destruction. We often think, okay, it killed a whole bunch of people, it killed all the animals. If you've ever been around a whole lot of water that's moving quickly, nothing is left behind. We're talking total destruction. That would even include plant life. The water's abating. It's coming. It's drying up. It's going away. The dove was able to find this, and also what we're seeing here. Well, step back to answer your question a little more thoroughly here. You killed the plant life, but you also have seeds. The seeds can rush around in that water, and it's going to find dry land and begin to grow again. I mean, this is basically, in farming, that's what you do. You kill the plant, and you reseed with the seeds from the dead plant. But what we're going to see here is it was a freshly picked, meaning life is coming back. Plants are growing. It wasn't an old one that had withered away from being destroyed. It was a freshly picked olive leaf. We also can see that olive branches is also seen as a sign of peace. The judgment is past. Peace is coming back. So the dove was able to find plant life, a sign that we're almost off this ark. Then he waited another 7 days, sent out a dove, and it did not return. Like we said, if the bird didn't return, it found somewhere to land. So we have more signs that it's about time to get off this ark. Now it came about in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month, the water was dried up from the earth. Then Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. Must be a sight to behold. In the second month, and on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God spoke to Noah, saying, Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and they may breed abundantly on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. Kind of jumping back to day one of the earth, right? Be fruitful and multiply. But as we see here, Noah, even though he sees dry land, doors open, dry land. All right, everybody get out. No, he waited for God to say, okay, you may leave. Once again, a step of faith here, a step of self-control, I can only imagine. A year on this ark cramped up, and you finally see ground's dry. Let's go. But he waited for God's instruction in this matter. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast and creeping thing and every bird, everything that moves on the earth, went out by their families from the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and every clean bird and offered a burnt offering on the altar. This is not the first time we've seen in the text an offering being given. But it is the first time that we see two other references in this statement. One is we're offering clean animals. And two, we have an altar. We spoke on it a little bit last week. We haven't seen an order, there is no law established on what is clean and unclean. So we're not seeing in the text, but I think it's a safe assumption to say that God has given Noah a few extra instructions that aren't laid here, namely, what is a clean animal? And I'd venture to say the idea of making an altar. So with this, we see that the animals have been released from the ark. Noah built this altar and took every clean animal, burnt offering, and offered a burnt offering. I don't even know if the idea of a burnt offering, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't really see a reference to a burnt offering before this time either. We see offerings from Cain and Abel, but nothing specifically in a burnt offering. So I venture to say that these are all new instructions offered to Noah. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, yeah. So, like I said, I mean, offering animals, it's safe to say, would have been a burnt offering, but where I'm getting at is this is the first time we see a burnt offering. So we see this form of worship being done. The Lord smelled a soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of a man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. So, I've used the term God has basically hit the reset button on the world. And though we have a faithful man and his family, God draws out the key thing. This didn't solve the problem. This isn't a solution to the sin nature that we have. Man's heart is evil from his youth. God knows this. But he has made a promise that he is not going to curse the whole world on man's account. But then he also declares something else here, that we now have seasons. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, all shall not cease. Here is a new cycle in the world. And it's not going to stop. I'll jump into chapter 9 if I still got some time here in a minute. I want to hit one other thing. So, this is a miraculous story. One that's, I'm sure we've all heard from our youth. This is also a very contested story. And often what we are told is, if Noah's Ark existed, why haven't we found it? Well, we have. It's been discussed, it's been recorded, it's been talked about for thousands of years, not just in this text. We can see here, in 275 BC, Berosus, a Babylonian historian, wrote, but of this ship that grounded in Armenia, some parts still remain in the mountains, and some get pitch from the ship by scraping it off. What was God's instruction to Noah? Build the ark and cover it in pitch. I don't know of any other reference of why a boat would be in the mountains. Around 75 AD, Josephus said the locals collected relics from the ark and showed them off to this very day. He also said all the ancient historians he knew of wrote about the ark. In 180 AD, Theophilus of Antioch wrote, the remains of the ark are to this day seen in the mountains. An elderly man in America that said that as a boy, he visited the Ark with his father and 3 atheistic scientists in 1856. Their goal was to disprove the Ark's existence, but they found it and became so enraged they tried to destroy it, but could not because it was too big and had petrified. In 1918, one of these atheistic scientists, an Englishman, confessed to this entire story on his deathbed. In 1876, a distinguished British statesman and author, Viscount James Bryce, climbed Ararat and reported finding a 4-foot-long piece of hand-tooled timber at an altitude of 13,000 feet. 6 Turkish soldiers claimed to have seen the Ark in 1916. In the early part of this century, a Russian aviator named Vladimir Rakovsky claimed the discovery of Noah's Ark. He was stationed in southern Russia near the Turkish border in Mount Ararat. As he tested a plane, he and his co-pilot flew over Ararat, discovered on the edge of a glacier what he described as a boat the size of a battleship. He said it was partially submerged in a lake, and he could see there was an opening from a door nearly 20 feet tall. But the door was missing. Rakovsky told his commanding officer, and an expedition was dispatched to find the Ark and photograph it. The reports were forwarded to the Tsar, who was soon overthrown, and the photos and reports were destroyed. 1936, a young British archaeologist named Hadrick Knight hiked across Ararat and discovered interlocking hand-tooled timbers at a height of 14,000 feet. And also during World War II, 2 pilots saw and photographed something they believed was the Ark on Mount Ararat. And that's where there was some silence for a while. But those pilots saw and photographed something they believed to be the Ark on Mount Ararat. Almost 20 years later, another spy plane was flying near Russia and caught a glimpse of a very strange, what looked like man-made structure on the top of this mountain. This was a U.S. Air Force pilot. An investigation was launched. The Air Force decided they're not going to handle it. Let's hand it to the CIA. CIA used spy planes and took photos. Due to the age of these reports, they're no longer classified and can actually be looked up if you dig really hard on the internet. But one other thing I found is interesting. We are now in an age where basically the entire surface of the earth is photographed. This is a picture of modern-day Turkey, Armenia, and you can see Mount Ararat. Easy to find. Google Images. Zoom in a little bit more. Nothing too amazing quite yet. But then we get real close. And as you can see, these pictures are kind of cobbled together. This is kind of normal. This photo was taken at one time. If you've ever dinked around in Google Maps, you kind of see these anomalies every so often. But you can keep zooming. And now, there's a lot of weird black marks in there, isn't there? I've seen these on Google Images quite a bit. I like to dink around, look at some weird things around the internet. Usually when you see these black marks, some government has said you're not allowed to see that. For the longest time, these black marks is what was over Area 51, until the government finally admitted it's there. Now they just have a stock image where there's nothing out on the airfield at that moment. You can also see these black marks if you try to look in North Korea. There's a few choice places where North Korea allows people to see a satellite image. The rest of them, just big black boxes. We zoom in a little bit more. can see a little bit of a brown at the bottom there. This is the location where those pilots seen Noah's Ark. There's also another really strange black spot further down when you start seeing the snow recede down in the bottom right there. Another strange black mark. This looks like a bunch of stones that have been stacked by some strange person out in the mountains. They've been there a while. Sounds like an altar. But why are these blacked out? Well, if all else fails, and you need some clear evidence, this first black one I told you, or showed you here, finally found the image those spy plane pilots took years ago. That's a boat in the mountain. That's Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, 14,000 feet in the air. Yep, right there at the edge of the mountain. So, it's there. And we've seen from 300 BC to fairly modern day references of people, yeah, it's there. We've been there. We've seen it. And since now it's no longer classified information, we now have a photo. So, you tell someone you believe in Noah's Ark, and they say, well, why haven't we found it? You just got to go 14,000 feet up on Mount Ararat. It's sitting right there. I was super excited about it. Yeah, if you guys want to, I could show you these photos afterwards. I got a little bit higher quality ones. Yeah. But yeah, it's right there. There's other stories about this, especially in modern times, where people disappeared after saying they found it, or heading out there and saying they're going to go find it. And really, this is one of those key extravagant stories that people can tell you the Bible isn't true. How could this have happened? But then there is a battleship-sized piece of evidence up in a mountain right now. So it happened. It's there. It's not just a fantastic story. But before I try to dive into chapter 9, I think we'll go ahead and give it a stop there, and we'll talk about God's promise to the world that He ain't going to flood the world again. And we're going to see what happens with Noah and his family. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you. It's an amazing thing that we read these texts and then we can actually see the evidence in our world today. It's an amazing thing. Often we can doubt the more extravagant stories, but to have physical evidence there now, this actually happened. These things are all true. Lord, we just thank you. We just thank you for your word and that it is true, that everything in it is accurate down to some of the oddest details we can find. Lord,